Chapter 3. So this chapter starts off with another segment from Dr. Chen's notes, and it goes like this. The Minikova bird is as large as the island of Negros or Bahol. He has a beak of steel, and his claws too are of steel. His eyes are mirrors, and each single feather is as sharp as a sword. He lives outside the sky, at the eastern horizon, ready to seize the moon when she reaches there from her journey under the earth. The moon makes 8 holes in the eastern horizon to come out of the 8 holes in the western horizon to go into, because every day the big bird tries to catch her, and she is afraid. The exact moment he tries to swallow her is just when she is about to come in through one of the holes in the east to shine on us again. If the Minakawa should swallow the moon and swallow the sun too, he would then come down to earth and gulp down men also. But when the moon is in the belly of the big bird and the sky is dark, then all the Bagaboo scream and cry and beat agons because they fear they will get dead. Soon this racket makes the Minokawa bird look down and open his mouth to hear the sound. Then the moon jumps out of the bird's mouth and runs away. All the old men know about the Minakawa bird in the Ulit stories. And then there's a little caption that says, "A myth of the Bagabo people of southern Philippines." Senate Hearing Chamber, Washington, D.C., United States. Ishiro Serizawa was no stranger to hearings. He'd been involved in a number of them. Some were more important than others. Today he found himself gazing at the seal of the United States on the wall behind the senators assembled for the meeting on their elevated platforms. The barrier of dark wood panels that separated the interrogators from those interrogated. This hearing was one of the important ones. Tensions between Monarch and the government had been growing for 5 years now. They were close to coming to a head. The committee chair was Clary Godini. She was smart, powerful, assertive. As a senator from Hawaii, a state both the Mutos and Godzilla had made very destructive tracks through. She was no fan of Titans or Monarch. Presently, she and the rest of the committee were regarding Monarch's head of tech, Sam Coleman, as he filled the presentation screen with a montage of Titans. "What we are witnessing here, senators," Sam said, "is the return of an ancient, forgotten species. Godzilla, the Mutos, Kong. We believe that these Titans and others like them provide an essential balance to our world. And while some may pose a threat, Monarch is uniquely prepared to determine which of these Titans are here to threaten us and which of these Titans are here to protect us." "Thank you for the 5th grade history lesson, Mr. Coleman," Senator Godini said, "but we still haven't heard one good reason why Monarch shouldn't fall under military jurisdiction, or why these creatures shouldn't be exterminated." Coleman walked back to his seat. Serizawa glanced over at Admiral Stans, who was looking sidelong at him. They had worked together 5 years ago. He thought Stans respected him, but his military mind was limited in some situations. Serizawa knew where a lot of push to kill the creatures came from. Monarch was tasked with finding and destroying these radioactive monsters, Godini went on, but you either can't or won't tell us how many there are or why they're showing up. So maybe it's time for the military to put them down. "Killing them would be a mistake," Serizawa said. "They returned because of us. It was our atomic testing that awoke Godzilla. Other creatures like the Mutos, from strip mining and seismic surveys. But these are not monsters, they are animals, rising to reclaim a world that was once theirs." "It almost sounds like you're protecting them, Dr. Serizawa," the senator said. "As if you admire them." "I admire all forms of life," Serizawa replied. He stood up. "Senators, If you hope to survive, we must find ways to coexist with the Titans, with Godzilla. Sort of symbiotic relationship, if you will. Dr. Vivini Graham, his friend and protege of many years, added. From the seat to his left, like the lion and the mouse. Serizawa settled back into his seat. Or the scorpion and the frog, Godin said. So you'd want to make Godzilla our pet? No, Serizawa said. We would be his. Everyone laughed at that, as if he'd been joking. From the corner of his eye, he saw Vivini pull over her phone. As the laughter died down, she tapped him on the shoulder. When he turned, she showed him the message on the little screen. He knew she wouldn't do that unless it was something urgent, and it was. Sam was still desperately trying to salvage the hearing. No, actually, he said. That's not what Dr. Serizawa meant. No one is implying that we would be Godzilla or anyone's pet. Sorry, we need to go, Vivini interrupted Serizawa. Stood up as she did, they quickly made their way towards the exit. Dr. Serizawa, Dr. Graham, Godin called after them. This hearing is not adjourned. Dr. Serizawa, I hope you understand the consequences of walking out that door. He ignored her. Sam watched Serizawa and Graham leave. Embarrassed and wondering what the hell was going on, he turned back to the committee. He clicked on an icon in his presentation. You know what, Senators, he said. While I confer with my colleagues here, I'm going to set you up with a very brief and pretty fun documentary on Titan reproduction. I think this is the one where the genitals are blurred out, but if not, you can leave a comment with my assistant. As images of Mutos came up, he hurried after Graham and Serizawa. Jebel, Barkal, Sudan, Monarch Outpost 75. So, there you go, Sergeant Nez, Ishmael said. Jebel Barkal, the place where the world began. Master Sergeant Margaret Nez tilted her head a little to the side and squinted her eye against the hot Sudanese sun. The place where the world began didn't look like much. Just a little mountain, maybe 100 meters high, flat on top. It wouldn't look that out of place in her new Mexican birthplace. Well, except for the pyramids scattered around it. Smaller and narrower than the pyramids she'd seen in Egypt. Is it? She said. So my ancestors said, Ishmael replied. And the ancient Egyptians believed so too. In the beginning, the world was covered in water, and then this mountain, Jebel Barkal, rose up out of it. Then the god Atum was born, and things got busy after that. Nez said. Ishmael was a local, a zoologist, and an employee of Monarch. He'd met her at the dusty little airport in Merkau and driven her here, proudly displaying his knowledge of the various empires that had ruled this place in ancient times, how there were more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt, and so forth. She judged him to be around the same age as her daughter, early 20s. She was glad he spoke English. Her Arabic was pretty decent, but the Sudanese dialect of Arabic was challenging. Your people have similar legends, yes? Ishmael said. My people, she said. Native Americans. You're Navajo? Dine, she corrected. Yeah, our story is we came out of a hole in the ground, got chased around by monsters for a while until these two brothers killed them all. She shrugged. I grew up on the checkerboard res. My folks didn't talk about that stuff much. But you believe in monsters, don't you? Ishmael said. After Godzilla flattened San Francisco, who doesn't? She said. I take it there was one right here someplace, or we wouldn't be here. So you were briefed? Ishmael asked. She nodded. The army had to clear me before they loaned me out to Monarch, but they were light on details. So what is it? Another big lizard? A bug thing? Mkole Mbembe, he said. Sir? Mkole Mbembe, he replied. The name comes from a legendary creature in the tales of the people of Zimbabwe. The name means one who stops the flow of rivers. Okay, she said. So is a lizard or a bug thing or... Close. A snake, I guess, he said. Or maybe an elephant, you see. You'll see. Okay, she shifted her rucksack so it dug in a different part of her shoulder. He noticed. I'm sorry, he said. I get excited. You'd like to put your things down and have a cold drink, I'm sure? That'd be nice, she said. Come along. A sturdy-looking fence had been set up around the ancient cemetery. The gate guards saluted her after checking her ID. Inside of the fence, rows of temporary barracks had been set up. Ness didn't see any place to hide a monster, though. Maybe inside one of the pyramids. Although they were all that big, there were other ruins too. Ancient places and temples, all mostly leveled by wind and time. Ishmael pulled up to one of the larger prefab buildings. Guards met them at the door, saluted, and let her through. Colonel Freeze will be back tomorrow, he explained. We can really get into your duties and such then. But in the meantime, I've been cleared to show you the big boy. I'll walk you to your quarters and we'll meet in the canteen at, let's say, 11,000 hours. 1,100 hours. She nodded. Her quarters were spare but serviceable. It had a real bed, not a cot, which amused her a little bit. Monarch wasn't a military organization, and it showed in the details, as well as the big picture. Most of the military equipment and personnel came from the government. She washed her face and took a quick spit bath, changed her shirt, and ran a comb through her short, still mostly black hair. Then she went to meet Ishmael. He took her across the compound to another building. Inside that was a cylindrical pit with walls of cut and fitted stone. In the floodlight, it looked like a gigantic deep well, but with a stairway spiraling down its walls. This was under one of the structures, he said, about 2 meters below capped with stone. Shall we go down? She nodded, and they continued. The harsh light picked out inscriptions on the stone, pictographs or perhaps hieroglyphs. Most of the structures upstairs are anywhere from about 2,300 years old to about 3,000, Ishmael explained. This stuff down here is older. The archaeologists think it could be more like 15 or 20, which is nuts because human civilization isn't supposed to stretch that far back. They reached the bottom of the shaft, which opened into a low stone chamber, bustled by columns carved to resemble strange, inhuman figures. One side of the structure was collapsed, and further in, that rubble had been dug out and shored up with much more modern hardware. The result was an immense cavern. Lying in it was something equally huge. It was too big to take in all at once. She strained to pick out details in the dim light, to factor out the containment rigging from the thing it contained. It was coiled up like a snake, but something big lay in the middle of the coils, suggesting that what she was looking at wasn't a snake, but something with a massive snake-like tail. The coils hid most of the detail of the central body and head, but the wicked-looking curve of a horn stuck up from it, pulsing with a very faint green light. She hadn't exactly told Ishmael the truth. Her parents hadn't talked about the stories of her people, the Dini, very much, but a lot of the older people in her family did. They spoke of the Nai, the ancient alien god giants who once plagued their ancestors. Tsinahali. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. The rock monster eagle. Yitso. The big giant's sash. another word I don't know how to pronounce. The attacking bear monster, Dealgeed, the horned monster. She didn't get the shivers, but her belly felt like it was full of caterpillars. Maybe this guy is why we never heard of these earlier civilizations, she murmured. Yeah, Shmuel said, maybe. Jonah pushed the dead body of a Monarch tech from his chair, checked to make sure the seat wasn't bloody. No sense in straining his clothes. It was clean, so he sat down. The dead man was still signed in, so it was no trouble to find the other containment sites. He copied them out, just in case the data he'd come by 5 years ago before was obsolete. There were more of them than he thought. That was good, the more the better. He was just finishing up when Escher arrived. Colonel, Escher said. Are Dr. Russell and her daughter secure, he asked. Yes, sir. We've got them in the Osprey. We're ready and any time you are. Good. He noticed Escher staring at the man he'd pushed out of the chair. Something bothering you? No, sir, he said. We're at war, Jonah said. There are casualties in war. I don't question that, Escher said. Jonah smiled. A really genuine smile he'd almost never brought out. Yes, you do, he said softly. You're young, yet you still care for these. After all, they are our species. Evolution built us to care for them, but evolution isn't always right, is it? Escher swallowed and tried to smile. Well, there was the dodo, he said, and the platypus. That doesn't seem quite right. You know what I mean, Jonah said. I do, yeah. Escher said, look, and what you did for me, nobody ever did anything like that for me before. I'm with you all the way to the end, no matter what. I'd kill 1,000 more like this if you tell me it's necessary. I'm not necessarily going to like it. I know that, Jonah told him, but we've got it all right here in our hands now. We can do anything we've dreamed of. It's not the time for hesitation. Yes, sir, Escher said. I understand that. Jonah nodded. We've got the passcodes and Monarch gear. Waiting on you, sir. Let's go, then, Jonah said. I'm done with this place. The metallic scent of blood mingled with that of pine and juniper overhead. A few vultures had already caught on, and were beginning their slow, patient surveillance. The songbirds had fallen silent except for the crows and jays, hacking out warning to their kin. The pack was feeding. Mark had watched them take the elk down, albeit from a good distance. How long had they been running it, he didn't know. But by the time he located them, the beast was too tired to put up a fight. A single wolf wouldn't have had much of a chance against an adult elk like this one. But wolves worked together. They communicated, coordinated, and executed. They followed their alpha, and now they feasted on their prey while their pups played crouched behind a fallen tree. Taking in that primal scene under the wide blue sky with trees and mountains towering around him, Mark felt as if he imagined the first human to behold these splendid creatures had. The admiration for them, the sense of kinship, the affinity between man and wolf had been so strong that some wolves had joined human packs back in the day and eventually became dogs. And some humans had joined wolf packs. He clicked more pictures wondering if Maddie would like them, if there was any sense in sending her any more. She hadn't answered any of his emails in a long time. He couldn't blame her. She had been so young, and when she needed him most, he'd fallen apart. He had been no good to her, to Emma, to anyone, but it still hurt. She was his Maddie, his daughter, his only child. She was almost his only tether to the other world, the world of cities and airplanes and the swarming masses. The connection felt weaker every day. Soon he would have no reason to ever go back there. He took out his digital recorder and set up a shotgun mic. He was here to work, after all, not just take in the sights. Funding went away if you never produced any results, especially when the people funding you were already a little dubious of your research. But he was sure he was onto something. Pack predators use a variety of sounds to communicate in obvious ways. Depending on the species, some of his earlier work had been with killer whales and dolphins, where much of that communication was outside the range of human hearing. He was convinced that other pack hunters like wolves also relied on sub-vocal signals to maintain pack cohesion, to help them sense the alpha and read his intentions. But to prove that, he needed data. The magnified sounds of the wolves came in through the headphones, the snarls, the sharp barks, the sound of flesh tearing, the whippers of a pup. But then he started adjusting through all of that, tuning out the extraneous sound, zeroing in on the literal heart of the beast until all he heard was a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. For a moment, Mark knew true bliss. He was where he belonged, doing what he was supposed to be doing, and any doubts he had were swept away by the mountain stream. A faint growl and scruff of leaves brought him out of it. He looked over his shoulder. The alpha, Okami, was about 3 meters behind him. His fangs were bared, and the ruff of his neck stood up. Crap, Mark slowly pulled out the 45 from his holster and pointed it at the beast. Their gaze locked. Okami growled and then showed all of his teeth. The moment hung there. Mark felt the beast of his own heart, and although his microphone wasn't pointed at the alpha, he thought he could feel Okami's pulse matching his own. He'd felt connected to the imposing creature since he'd first seen him, and now in this moment of life and death, a bond was stronger than ever. Okami led his pack and protected them. He knew what human beings were capable of. He wasn't the one out of line here. Mark broke eye contact. Wolf saw that as a threat. He'd bowed lower, holstered the gun, and reached out towards the wolf submissively. Okami growled again, but softer. The standing hair on his neck relaxed a little. He took a step towards Mark, but then his head jerked up. He bounded away, towards his pack. Mark watched him go, taking deep, long breaths, feeling the flush of reaction. What had just happened? But then he heard a distant thud, a familiar sound. Not natural, but mechanical. Rotors beating in the air above. A helicopter. He scanned the sky and saw it. No, not a helicopter. An osprey. It looked almost like a plane with stubby wings, except that at the end of each wing spotted a cylindrical engine and rotors like a helicopter. The wolves darted away within seconds. They all vanished. This was it for his fieldwork today, maybe for several days, because the damned thing wasn't just passing over, it was landing. The wolves wouldn't like that at all. The buzzards, on the other hand, would be pleased. They would go and get more of their usual share of the leftovers. The osprey dropped lower. What the hell, he thought. What did they think they were doing? Who did they think they were? Then he saw the markings on the machine's stabilizer, 4 lines, a cross with 2 ends closed off, so it resembled a hourglass on its side, or a highly stylized butterfly. Monarch. These were monster hunters. What could they want from him? He didn't work for Monarch anymore, hadn't for years. But he knew the answer to that even as he asked it. Or was afraid he did. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe they were just bringing Maddie for a visit. If that was the case, he could forgive them for scaring off the wolves. The craft touched down on a relatively even spot. The motors cut and the rotors began to slow. He watched as these people debarked. None of them were Maddie. He knew two of them, Dr. Ishiro Serizawa, Dr. Vivini Graham. They were both important players in Monarch. Serizawa had been obsessed with Godzilla, chasing signs of the reptilian monster for decades, hoping to get a glimpse of it years ago. He'd gotten his wish, when not just he, but everyone else on the planet had a good look at the rampaging beast. A lot of people had gotten such a good look, they never saw anything else again. Graham had been Serizawa's protege for a long time, but last he'd heard, she had been assigned to some project in Antarctica. He had worked on with both of them along with Emma prior to the Godzilla thing. The third guy he didn't know was Adam. They didn't look like they were bringing good news.